Being a chartered manager means that you are a specialist in that area, and it means you've got all the skills to do the job to the best of its ability.
You are seen as a leader, a true leader who has credentials behind the great work you've already been doing.
It's enhanced my understanding, it's enhanced my skill set, it's improved my mindset.
It makes all the difference.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Hello everybody and welcome to our inaugural Leadership Lounge. I'm Anne Francke. I'm the Chief Executive of the CMI, and this is our London office you're in, and we are joined obviously by the people in the room, so welcome. And also we have many hundred people online who've joined us tonight. Now I'm delighted that my inaugural guest this evening is Baroness Minouche Shafik. I know she doesn't use all her titles, but she has them. She was the youngest ever Vice President of the World Bank, I think age 36. Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Permanent Secretary at the UK's Department for International Development, when it was ranked the best performing in government. And now, obviously, very proactive in education, was the former president of Columbia University in New York, one of my alma maters, and also of the London School of Economics, which is just right across the street. So now she is, has very recently, I think in January, been appointed by the Prime Minister to be the new chair of the V&A, having been on the board of the British Museum. So amazing cultural, huge breadth as an economist, education leader, cultural leader, civil servant. So many, many strings to her bow, and we're delighted to have her with us this evening.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Thank you. Now, I did give a run-through of your various titles, but I'd like to start with your version of your career history. Walk us through the highlights, the lowlights, and the defining moments.
Okay. So I've had a sort of a career in 3 chapters. The first chapter was very focused on international development and fighting poverty in the world, and that was kind of like the World Bank and the Department for International Development. The sound is not good. Should we,
Oops, mine works.
Is that? Hello.
Just.
You're going to give me the old-fashioned kind of. Okay, let's start again. Is that better? No. How about that? Yes, yes, no. How about that? No.
Oh, well, people in the back room, Minouche's mic is not working.
Hello,
so you
hello.
probably, there
now
you go.
Now it's on? Is it working?
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay, let me start again. So I was saying my career has had sort of 3 chapters. The first chapter was very focused on international development and fighting poverty in the world, and now it just gave up on me. Hello. Hello, hello.
2 2.
Yes. Very fickle.
So what we could do,
You want to share? Let's share.
Well, yeah. Because they won't.
Hello, hello. Fabulous. Okay. All right, let's go again. So, third time lucky. 3 chapters. 3 chapters.
3 chapters, 3 mics.
So the first one was very focused on international development and fighting poverty in the world. And that was a really, for a whole variety of personal reasons, a cause I was very, very committed to. I went straight after finishing my PhD to work at the World Bank, and then ran the Department for International Development in the UK at an incredible moment when Make Poverty History was really powerful, and we had a government that was very committed to international development, and it was a wonderful highlight, really, and a wonderful time to have both political backing and resources to do something very meaningful. The second chapter was my kind of macro finance banking chapter, where I went and worked at the IMF during the Eurozone crisis and was responsible for the programs in places like Greece and Portugal, who were having real major debt crises. And then after that, I went to the Bank of England and my time at the Bank of England coincided with not much excitement on interest rates, but a lot of excitement with referenda, both the Scottish referenda and the Brexit referenda, and thinking about how to manage the risks around those from a central banking point of view. And then the third chapter was the university chapter. And so I was president of the London School of Economics and of Columbia, and kind of got to see the differences between UK and US universities, and the challenges of managing academics and students and making the finances work of these very complicated hybrid kind of institutions. So those were the 3 chapters of my career.
So each very interesting, I'm sure lots of similarities and differences, but when you reflect on those chapters, how would you describe your leadership style, and what values and behaviors for you are important and constant? Maybe what did you have to flex and do differently across those different sectors? And I know we've touched on the difference between management and leadership, and maybe you can also elaborate on that.
So I tend to have a very inclusive management style. I like management by walking around and talking to people and making sure that they know that you're accessible and open. I also, I don't have to be the smartest person in the room, and so I would much prefer to have really talented, smart people around me and bring out the best in them. And I think when you chair meetings, it's important that everyone participates and that you get the best out of everyone there. That the person who's the boss shouldn't be doing all the talking, because then you're kind of shutting down creativity and input. In terms of the difference between management and leadership, I always think that management is when you have some knowledge about the challenges you're facing. You have data, you have resources, you can measure outcomes, and the challenge as a manager is to allocate resources and assign staff to deliver whatever it is you're meant to be achieving, and you can measure those achievements. That's management. Leadership is when you can't do any of those things because there's so much uncertainty. And it's a lot more about feeling your way, revising your strategy as you get more information, and dealing with a lot of ambiguity. You have leadership at all levels of organizations. The more senior you get, the more leadership you have, because the really easy problems tend to be solved by managers more junior in the organization, and then you get stuck with the really stinky problems, the really difficult problems. But it's important to have leadership at all levels of an organization. And then just in terms of, you asked about the contrast between the different organizations I've worked in. I mean, one observation is that I've worked in organizations that are about doing good, like universities or organizations focused on reducing poverty in the world. And they tend to be full of optimistic people who are very mission-driven. And then I've worked in organizations that are about preventing bad things from happening. So in my case, the IMF, the Bank of England, which is meant to prevent inflation and make sure that banks don't fall over. And those organizations tend to be populated by people who are very aware of risks and a little pessimistic and worry a lot. Because it's their job to worry. You could think of security people who were, the police or the security organizations also, they're about the fire department, preventing bad things from happening. And the former organizations tend to not do very well when bad things happen because they assume that we're doing God's work and what could go wrong. and the second kind of organization tend to maybe not seize opportunities as much because they're less
Too worried.
They're too worried about all the things that could go wrong. So I just leave you with that observation.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating observation, and I think it's probably true, largely, right, in those kinds of headline terms you described. But I want to go back to your point that leadership is about dealing with a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty, and I know we'll come on to some advice you have later on. But you were, I think you mentioned at the Bank of England when the Brexit referendum happened, right? And there you go, big, unexpected outcome, very uncertain. So what did you do?
So I learned a lot about crisis management in that period because we had done a ton of contingency planning beforehand. And at the time, I remember thinking, gosh, we're really, to describe the amount of contingency planning we did, I was responsible for markets and banking, and for the what's called the sterling monetary framework to make sure that if a bank suddenly needed dollars or sterling or euros, the Bank of England would be there and available to have it. So we sent, I talked a lot with the Fed in New York and the ECB in Frankfurt. We sent $1 to the Fed to practice to make sure that if we needed urgent flows of dollars, the pipes were working. We did the same with the ECB.
But only $1.
Just to test the pipes, because you could imagine you have a crisis, an emergency, and you need an infinite supply of dollars, and suddenly there's some IT hitch. So we did that. We made sure all the banks were squared up in terms of their foreign exchange exposure, so that if something happened to sterling, which it did, that we wouldn't see sudden losses in many of the banks. We did endless conversations to make sure that banks were ready in that situation, and I remember so clearly when, and if you remember, the polls were a bit ambiguous, but most people were not expecting the vote to go the way it went. But we were all told to be in the bank at 4 a.m. to be ready when the markets opened in Asia. And so at about, I think it was like 3 a.m, I set my alarm to check the results, and I thought, oh my God. Rushed to the bank. We all were there, bright and early, and because we had done all that preparation, because we had thought about all the contingencies, everybody was super calm because we had plans. And I went into the trading room and I watched sterling collapse in the Asian markets from $2 to about $1.30, $1.25. But it was orderly, and we were ready, and there was no market disruptions, and the markets adjusted to the new price, and no bank fell over, and the governor could stand up and say, we have £250 billion ready to go if anybody needs it, but nobody needed it because we were there. And it really, taught me a lot about, preparation is everything.
Wow.
And contingency planning is
I guess
really
saying
important.
calm is important too.
Calm is good. Calm is good. The other thing I always have is chocolate around. Chocolate is good. I always had lots of chocolate in my office, in the trading room. It makes people happy, keeps them going.
Excellent. Well, that's a great recipe for calm and chocolate, the way to deal with uncertainty. So your career's been in what I think we can say are still traditionally male-dominated sectors: economics, banking, even in education. Most VCs and presidents are not women. So what have you learned about how you progress in those fields where maybe there are fewer women role models, and what's been your experience of that, and what advice would you have there?
So earlier in my career, it was much, much worse. I think now the numbers are much more balanced in many, many workplaces, although not all. And when I first started, I didn't have any role models. And certainly when I started at the World Bank, I was there for 15 years, there were only a very small number of senior women. And in that era, none of them were married and none of them had children, because that was the only way you could get ahead. The first time I had a female boss was Christine Lagarde at the IMF. And by that stage, 2014, I was in my late 40s by the time I ever had a female boss. It's the field I was in. Education was a little bit better, but not much better than the economics and finance. I think I learned a lot of things. One, I think in every organization I worked in, there was always a group of women who supported each other. And we would often, literally in every organization I have been in, I can point to, because we were always in the minority, it was nice to just sometimes be with other women and not feel like you're a minority all the time. And that support, and it wasn't like professional networking or anything, it was getting together over a meal and a glass of wine and just sharing stories and thoughts and support. And so that support network is important. I've been in lots of organizations that have all sorts of mentoring programs and sponsorship programs and training programs and diversity programs and all of those things. And some of them have worked well, some of them have worked not so well. I think there's been mixed experience with organizations that have used targets, and we can have a debate about that. But I think a key thing today, if you look at globally what's happening for women in the workplace, we've actually achieved gender parity in education. In fact, if you look globally today, more women go to university than men everywhere, not just in the UK, in Europe, in the US, in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East. So women are getting highly educated.
And they're getting better grades.
And they're getting better grades. That's true too. That's true too. Well, it's interesting. What happens with women is that on average, they do better, but the men's distribution is wider. So the men tend to get the very top marks
and the very
bottom. And whereas the women anyway. But you could tell from someone who used to run a university anyway. But where was I going with that? So women are doing well in terms of education, but it's not always translating into the workplace.
No.
And we see much better, obviously, at the recruitment levels, much more gender balance. And the thing that's holding women back, I think, today, given their education levels, is childcare. It's all about childcare. Affordable childcare, accessible childcare, a better distribution of labor in the home, so that women can stay in careers.
Sure. And childcare in the UK and in the US is those are some of the more difficult, more expensive, where it's less accessible compared to many other countries. And yet it's talked about a lot. There's a lot of talk, certainly in this country, about what we could do, but we don't necessarily do it. What do you think should happen there with your policy hat on?
The UK has the most expensive childcare in Europe and probably in the OECD. It's very, very expensive. It's vital both for women to stay in the labor market and increasingly for men to stay in the labor market. And so, I do think that there is a social case for increasing subsidization of childcare, because in the long run, it pays for itself because you're keeping people in the labor force for longer. The other thing I'd say about just women in the labor market is there's a very nice book written by Claudia Golden, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, on the history of kind of women in work. And she talks a lot about greedy jobs. There are certain jobs that are greedy in terms of your time. And they tend to be jobs that are client-facing, where you have to be at the beck and call of clients. Think investment banking, law, management consulting. Those are jobs that are really badly suited to people who have children. Because people who have children, they can work a lot of hours as long as they can control the hours and have some predictability. But having to be on call at the weekends or at strange hours really works against women. And so she gives the example of pharmacists. Pharmacy is a field where there's actually quite a lot of gender parity and a lot of women, because you can predict your hours. And it's become automated such that I can be working certain hours and then you can pick up for me at a different time, and we can pass the work between each other. Whereas if I'm an investment banker or a lawyer, I want to hold on to my client. I'm not going to pass my client on to you because I'm paid and incentivized in a certain way. And so thinking about the structure of jobs and how to make jobs less greedy would do a huge amount to keep women in the labor market and also improve the quality of work for men, because those jobs are also very tough on men.
Yeah, they are. They're tough, absolutely, on everybody. But if you, let's try that again. If you think about opening up opportunity, so obviously creating opportunity for all is very important. At CMI, we did a project called the Everyone Economy, which is about obviously how much more productive it would be if there were access to everyone, for everyone, to not just, well, I guess some of the greedy jobs, but also the non-greedy jobs and more progression in the labor market. What are some of the principles that you think work well in organizations to promote opportunity for all, whether that's social mobility or ethnicity or whatever the marginalized characteristics are? What works in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, most good organizations have training programs that they offer for people, particularly often making sure that people who are least likely to take them or have had those opportunities use them. I think, mentoring and sponsorship is really important. When I was growing up in my career, there were no female mentors because there weren't any. But now, and so I had male mentors.
But they were good, right?
Me. Yeah, and the most important thing I think they did for me was they gave me ridiculously high-level assignments way before I was probably ready for them. But they were willing to take a risk on me, and then you kind of rise to the challenge. And I think that the willingness of organizations to take risks on people who might not fit the mold is a really important thing for them and for the organization's success.
And that's kind of like sponsorship, right? Somebody who's advocating for you, hey, let's give Minouche that. Let's see what she does with it, right? Probably they said that when you weren't even there.
Yes.
Right? And then they said, hey, Minouche, I've got a project for you, right? So that's very important. I agree with that. But then you've also worked in a large number of multicultural organizations. And what are your thoughts about that? What are the benefits, and what are some of the barriers or things you need to watch out for?
So I spent 18 years of my career, actually 18 years in international organizations, but also the London School of Economics is highly, highly international. So I've spent most of my career in very heterogeneous organizations. And for me, I loved that. I loved, traveling with someone from Macedonia and someone who was French and somebody who was Brazilian, and we would, compare notes about how our lives had been different and different norms and things in our cultures. And for me, I was intensely curious about that. In the workplace, it does pose challenges. So places like the World Bank and the IMF, they deliberately mix people up. And in fact, you're not allowed to work on your own country. You have to work on other countries because it makes you sort of more objective when you're assessing the performance of an economy or deciding on a loan to a particular country. And I have to acknowledge, I can't pretend that it's all hunky-dory and it's all lovely and kumbaya. In the beginning, when you have very diverse teams, I think there is evidence that it takes more work. You have cultural barriers to overcome. There are often linguistic barriers. You often words mean different things to you. And on the flip side, I think what the evidence also shows is once you've overcome those barriers, you're actually much, much more productive and much, much more effective. I always remember doing at some training thing, we were doing this kind of, it wasn't a game, it was like a trial thing where you formed people into teams, and the teams were very mixed. And you were supposed to rank order what you would take on an Arctic survival trip. And they gave you a list of, here's 10 things, which are the most important things for you to survive in the Arctic. And everyone ranked individually, and then they worked as a group. And I always remember that there wasn't a single individual that did better than any group. The groups were always better. When you had a diverse group of people that beat any individual. And so it just seared in my head the idea that even the smartest person can't do better than a diverse group.
Okay, I gotta know now, what's the number one thing?
Matches. Matches, I always remember that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, you've had positions, not most recently, I think we can point to the position in New York as president of Columbia, where you were subject to intense scrutiny, every which way. Tell us, what was that like, and how did you keep your resilience in that situation?
No, I mean, I think it's very, very hard, especially in the age of social media. And I think, a senior woman who gave me a very good piece of advice. She said, don't read the social media. Just don't read it. You will go mad if you read it. And, and half of them are bots anyway. They're not even real people. So, why are you going to bother with that? Get a summary. Get someone on your team to give you a summary so you kind of know what's going on. But don't waste your time reading it. And I think that's pretty good advice, actually. You need to know what's going on, but you can't make decisions based on, the extreme voices out there. And I think the other thing is that you need to have a good team around you, and be open and listen and hear those voices. And then you've also, just from a very practical point of view, you have to kind of take care of yourself and try and sleep and eat and exercise a little bit if you can find the time. But if depending on the duration of the crisis you're dealing with, I learned that a lot when I was managing humanitarian crises at DFID. And early on in my tenure, we had to deal with the tsunami in East Asia. And, these humanitarian teams are moving goods across borders and jerry cans and tents and water supply. And you can't let people work more than 8 hours a day. And so we had a very clear rota that you force people to go home and rest, and the next rota came in to deal with the next phase of the crisis. And so particularly for long duration crises, you really have to manage everyone's energy levels, because you can't sustain and make good judgments in a crisis if you're exhausted.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. So don't read social media and take care of yourself, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first, as they say. Well, equally, you've also worked, well, you said, we talked about it earlier, that we're living in a hugely uncertain age, right? Political uncertainty, economic uncertainty, technological uncertainty, climate uncertainty, everything. So whether you're a senior leader or whether you're just starting out, what advice would you give as somebody who's made quite the career of managing uncertainty? What are the characteristics? What are the skills and capabilities that you need as a senior leader and as somebody just starting out? What advice would you give?
I heard a very good story this week, which I think responds to that question, which is was told by an army officer where a group of potential new recruits were taken up a steep hill. They were blindfolded, taken up a steep hill, and told to jump. There were three groups. One group refused to jump because they were so afraid of stepping into the unknown. They were not hired. The second group jumped immediately and threw themselves in. They were hired to be soldiers because they would be very obedient and do what they're told. The third group kneeled down and felt around to see where they were and realized quickly that they were not on a very high ledge and then jumped. And they were hired to be officers and leaders because in a situation of uncertainty, they took the time to gather more information, to not react too quickly, and then based on the information they had gathered, made a judgment. And I think it's a silly story, but it's a good example of the kinds of principles you need to follow in decision-making under uncertainty, which is keep new information coming. Always update your data, because in an uncertain situation, new things are always happening. And then when you've got new data, and I learned this a little bit from COBRA meetings, which when in the crisis management meetings in the cabinet office, when there's a crisis in this country, there's a thing called COBRA meetings. People think it sounds very exotic, like COBRA is like a snake. It actually stands for Cabinet Office Boardroom A. You heard that from me, anyway. But it was held at a particular meeting room, and they had a very clear regimen. First item on every agenda is, what's the new data? What have we learned today? Mm-hmm. Second item is, how does this new data affect all the previous decisions that we've made in the previous days? And so you review each of the decisions you've made. Should we change any of those decisions based on the new information we've got today? And then, next item is new assignments. Who's going to do what? Final item is communication, both internal and external. Who do we need to tell, and both internally and externally, based on what we know so far? And all of this was clearly minuted, and then you use those minutes to inform the day's meeting for the next day, where you review the decisions you've made, new information, etc. And in a situation of extreme uncertainty, this is a very structured way of decision-making in a real crisis, but I think that the principles of reviewing data regularly, reviewing your decision-making, thinking about communications,
and also
really
what
helpful.
actions need to change. I think actually that's a great way of navigating uncertainty. And presumably you could do that if you're just starting out, or you could do that if you're the leader of an organization.
Absolutely.
And I guess you have to add the extra step today, especially the people who are just starting out who might be doing this. Can I trust that new data?
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot, as you say, you can't trust.
Absolutely, and you're right that today you need to even go back to the old data you got and ask, is it still valid, and has it been confirmed from a reliable source?
Yeah, excellent. Well, I want to give you all time to ask questions, so we're going to turn to questions now. We have people online, people in the audience, but I always like to start with the people who are here in real life. So who would like to ask a question? If you could just say your name and where you're from, and if I could just say, please, could it be a question? And perhaps not too long. Yes.
Hi. My name's Eva Perkins. I'm a managing director at Knowledge Consulting. I'm interested in all of the organisations you've worked in terms of different cultures and different kind of quite male orientated organisations. How do you see culture and then change it? How do it's easy to do in your immediate teams, right? Because you're the leader, but how do you do that across a vast organisation? Possibly an impossible answer, but...
It's really difficult. You've probably heard this expression, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah, it's it is incredibly important and really hard to do because there is no one thing you can change. But I think, I'll give an example from the London School of Economics. When I started at the LSE, we had terrible student satisfaction ratings. In fact, I think we were almost the worst in the Russell Group. And I needed to change the culture around teaching and student experience. And I was told, oh, it's impossible, faculty aren't incentivized, faculty want to do their research, they don't really want to teach, it's considered a burden. Well, anyway, so I actually worked and I recruited someone who really was an expert in pedagogy. And we developed a plan, but it had many dimensions to change the culture around teaching. We did many things. We linked, I'm an economist, right? So we linked everybody's performance pay to teaching and feedback from students. We looked at where the pinch points were in the organization. So economics at LSE was a really popular subject. Almost everybody took many people took an economics course, and so if we got economics to work well, it would have this spillover effect in the organization. And so we reformed our economics program. We were still very reliant on one exam at the end, which determines your whole grade, which was terrifying for students. And so we introduced much more continuous assessment, including in economics. We listened to students. We put students on all the major committees in the organization, so we got lots of direct feedback about how we could improve the culture around teaching. And so those are just a few examples. It was a very long list of things, but I guess my main point is you need a real diagnosis of what the cultural problem is, and usually a multi-pronged strategy. In the end, LSE was University of the Year last year. We're top of the Russell Group in terms of student experience and satisfaction. It took time. It was a several-year thing, but we got there in the end. And, obviously clear messaging from the top, and, everybody was tired of hearing me talk about how important the student experience was. But it worked. People, if you're very clear and consistent for a long time, people hear you.
Yeah, and having that patience, right? Too many people think it's a quick fix, and it's often not. It's many multi-pronged, and the same is true of creating opportunities, for everybody, right? It does take time. It's not a quick fix. Great. Another question. Yes, Alini.
Yes, thank you. Pleasure to hear from you. I wrote a question here.
Baroness, you have spoken powerfully about the need to rebuild social contracts for the 21st century. Ones that are more inclusive, more fair, more future-facing. And in a world of polarization and digital acceleration, what role do you believe cultural institutions like our beloved V&A can and should play in shaping this new social contract, especially in how we reach and reflect the next generation?
No, thank you for that question. It's something I'm thinking a lot about these days, and I'm not sure I have the answer yet. But I wrote a book during COVID, in fact, because I was really puzzled and worried and puzzled by the degree of polarization in our societies. But it was really triggered by 2016, the Brexit vote, Trump's election, what had happened to public discourse around the world, and I couldn't figure out why people are so angry, and what does one do to try and rebuild the cohesiveness in our societies. So I won't bore you with the whole book because it is a long story, is a long answer. But the question here is on cultural institutions, and I do think cultural institutions. Well, I'll say one other thing. When I started writing about this issue, I thought the problem was economic inequality. I thought people are angry because they don't feel they have economic opportunities, and inequality is so pervasive, and people at the bottom feel like they'll never get to the top. And the data partly play that out. In the UK, it takes 5 generations from being in the bottom decile of the income distribution to the middle. That's a long time. In Denmark, it takes 2 generations. And so your hope for social mobility is far greater in other places. In Brazil, it's 9 generations. So, just to show the contrast. But I increasingly have come to the view that it's not just about economics. I think it's also about identity. Brexit was in theory, a debate about an economic relationship with Europe, but it was actually more about identity. Who we are, who's in our society, what is the role of immigrants, that whole set of identity issues. And I think cultural institutions are really important for helping think through identity. And I think they have a really important role in helping people understand their own identities, the impact of other identities on each other. My favorite example, I think most people here are old enough to remember the London Olympics, but
Yes.
my favorite example was the opening ceremony of the London Olympics. I don't know how many of you remember that ceremony. It was a celebration of British identity. It was quirky, it was multicultural, it was, you had the Industrial Revolution, you had rock music, you had James Bond and the Queen jumping out of the helicopter. It was,
you had the NHS
you had the
beds.
NHS beds and Mary Poppins jumping on the beds. It was very distinctive, and it was a cultural moment which really created a sense of national unity and pride. And I think cultural institutions need to be doing a bit more of that at this moment, when people are, when there is so much division in our politics. We need to invest proactively in building a cohesive national culture and identity.
Great question and wonderful answer. Yes, the lady in the red.
Thank you. Hello, Baroness. I'm Chinwei, and I'm an actuary at Just Group. And I am just really impressed by your career and the journey you've gone through. And I just wondered, because of course going so high, in your career, I've learned that imposter syndrome is something that's generally there. And I just wondered, what was your each time when you took that step to that higher plane, what helped you, keep that in check?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I definitely had imposter syndrome. I remember when I was appointed a vice president at the World Bank, and I was 36. All my peers were men in their late 50s, and I was terrified. And I always remember a lovely, very distinguished economist who had been a vice president at the World Bank, and he said to me, "Minouche, look at all the other schmucks who are vice presidents at the World Bank. You're at least as good as them." And it just, it was just so reassuring to have somebody who was very senior, very respected, just say, "Look, you've got to get perspective." For me, like all these other, the peer group that I had suddenly been thrust into were people who I had thought of were just these, incredibly impressive, talented people. And he just said, "No, you're at least as good as them." So I think having someone to remind you of that is really, really important.
Yeah, that's the beauty of having a sponsor that actually makes you think we're all human. We're going to take a couple more questions from the floor, and then I have some online. The gentleman in the front, and then the one in the middle with the...
Thank you. I hesitate to be the lone male voice, but answer is absolutely fascinating. I'm Trevor Campbell-Davis. I'm the finance chair of various alpine organisations. I'd like to ask you about conflict and adversity within a senior position. When you were at Columbia, you got caught in the crossfire big time. What did you learn from that? And in particular, if you were doing it again, what would you do differently?
I mean, that's a very big question, so I'm not sure I can answer it in the limited time we've got. But I'd say, some conflicts can't be solved at a particular moment. And in that situation, there was so much polarization and division, and people really not wanting to compromise. That sometimes you have to sort of get through it and wait for a moment when you're actually able to build bridges between different people. I tried very hard to create opportunities for dialogue and opportunities where different perspectives could be brought together. And, it worked a little bit, but I think, in the social media age, you're not just working within your own organization. There are many outside forces, in this case, who are very eager to fuel conflict internally. Outside forces, political forces, bots, and
foreign governments, right?
Big financial interests, and in that situation, it's institutions can be very, very fragile, and it's very, very hard to keep them together.
I think those conflicts are still ongoing, right? And they still haven't been definitively resolved. There was a young man in the back with the blue lanyard. Yeah, no, in the middle. Sorry. Yeah.
My name is Bert Rofield-Hurd. I'm a financial controller at a private equity firm. You spoke earlier about your management style, and I just wanted to ask you how you find the balance between understanding your management style and honing your management style, and managing large groups of people who may respond very differently to different management styles.
No, and that's something that comes up a lot if you're in an international organization or a very, organization with people coming from very, very different backgrounds who are used to very different management styles. I think there are some people who find comfort in hierarchy and being told what to do. And I have encountered people like that when I've worked with them, and I'm thinking of an example right now, which was relatively recent, where, I had come into an organization where people had been told what to do for many, many, many years. And when I asked them what they thought about something, they would parrot what they had been told under the previous regime, because they had all creativity kind of knocked out of them after many years of being put under a very kind of hierarchical, rather authoritarian management style. And it was almost like they were traumatized, actually. And so it took me a while I kept saying to them, but I know you don't really believe that, what you just said to me. Tell me more, what do you really think? And I really want to hear your views. I find that most people really appreciate being engaged in that way, but sometimes, a combination of their past experience and a little bit of insecurity means that they hold back, and that is such a loss. It is such a loss. All of us have sat in meetings, and there's some quiet person who never speaks, and you think, God, maybe they've got something really important to contribute here, and none of us are benefiting from it. I am also I do not mechanically go around and make sure that everyone says everything on every topic, but I will, as a chair, proactively try and make sure that people who aren't speaking get invited to come in at some point. So I was always the new girl. So I have very good new girl antenna. And one of the things I always remember was that the kids who would approach you in the beginning were usually not the ones you ended up being friends with, because they had some agenda. And it's often like that in the workplace. The people who are the most eager in the beginning usually have some reason why they're so eager. And so trying to not fall into that trap. And, let's face it, too many leaders are too vulnerable to flattery.
I can think of one.
You want to say?
Couldn't possibly say. No, well, he's leading my other country right now, right?
Yes. Yeah, vulnerable to flattery. And like being in an echo chamber. And it's like, being in an echo, what is the point of being in an echo chamber? So I try, you have to be very self-aware to avoid that risk, but I think it's really, really important. If you want to be effective, you want to get the best out of people, you need to bring out all that talent.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I do want to give the people online who've taken the time to join us the opportunity to ask some questions. I think, Michael, you've been fielding them.
Yes, indeed. So we have a question from online from a Sam Russell. What advice would you give to a new leader who finds themselves in the fire of an organizational crisis?
New leader who's just come into an organization, yeah. I think if you're a new leader, I would really invest in building relationships with the team that is there if you're a new person, because you won't know the history and you won't have access to the same information networks that everyone else has. And so I think making sure you've got a team and you've got good relationships with people who are there already is really, really an important first step. I think the other thing I'd say is just to sort of some of the sort of tips that I gave about being open to new information and making sure that you're revising your decisions based on new information on a regular basis is really important in a crisis. And if you're a new leader, it's very tempting to kind of go back to your comfort zone and shelter in place kind of thing, as opposed to staying open. And I think that's a really important lesson.
Another online question?
So we have another question. This is a question from Fionuala. When you move to a new job, how do you accelerate your learning and succeed despite everything you don't know about the new culture and organization?
So I'm a big believer in doing your homework and learning as much as you can about the organization you're in. And so I, would invest a lot in doing research, talking to people. I should have said this earlier. I have quite a structured approach when I join a new organization. There are many books about this, but basically, certainly when I joined, I started when I joined the Department for International Development. I did the same thing. At the IMF, I went straight into a crisis, so I didn't have time. At the LSE, I did it, and I tried at Columbia, and I did it at Columbia, which is you spend the first 3 months asking everybody the same questions. And usually it's 3 very simple questions. What's really great about this organization? What's not working so well? And what should I focus on first? And if you ask, they're such simple questions, but if you ask, let's just say 50 to 100 people in an organization, those 3 questions, you will very quickly piece together a diagnosis, what needs to happen. And also people really value you asking them as a new person wanting to know and understand the organization. And then with that diagnosis, then use that to kind of define what you should do in your new job.
That's great advice. 3 simple questions. Remember those. So we're coming to the end. I'm going to take one more online question, and then I want to have the last question from somebody here. So be ready with your hand. One question from Michael. One more from online.
Yes, so this question relates to the earlier conversation around childcare, and this is from Melissa Tall. Why don't more organisations have in-house childcare? The leaders at the top could potentially change this and erase barriers. What are your thoughts on that?
So I actually think that since COVID and flexible working, people's desires for childcare solutions have changed. So many people want childcare close to home rather than in their workplace. And so I'm much more keen on giving people, a menu of options. And, if organizations are big enough to afford on-site childcare, that's great. But if people, get vouchers or subsidies for childcare near their homes, that's great. Paternity leave is great. Flexible paternity leave, which can be shared between parents, is great. And I think people's lives are just very, very complicated, and giving people lots of options so that they can adjust to their circumstances is really the best option.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Okay, one more question. Oh, who is first? Wait, you had a question. No, it's the lady next to the, yes, you with your hand up there and next to the lady in the red.
Hi, my name is Martha. I'm a recent graduate from King's. I got a bachelor's in economics. So when you're discussing the issue of inclusivity, you mentioned that it's beneficial for organisations to take risks on people and let them rise up to the challenge. It reminded me of a line in your book, I think, in the education chapter, where you mentioned that organisations should consider what people will do in the future, what they have the ability to do in the future, not just what they've done in the past. But from my personal experience, kind of navigating the job market in the past few months, that's not entirely the reality, at least kind of in London at the moment. So I was curious to know kind of what are your thoughts on that, and what advice do you have, if at all, for fresh graduates like myself with regards to creating, even seeking opportunities in this kind of environment?
It's one of my worries, because I think I just read something today about how many organizations, when they're using something like LinkedIn to recruit, years of experience is a key filter that they use. And so if you haven't got lots of years of experience, you're kind of cooked. And that's a very backward-looking way of looking at employees. And I do feel for recent graduates, which includes my own children who are graduating this year. I think this is a very difficult job market, and in a weird way, the prevalence of AI has ratcheted up the number of applications people have to submit to find a job, and it's kind of bad, because the you put in 100 applications, the employers receive 100-fold more than they used to. There's still the same number of jobs. It's just there's a lot more churn on both for employees and employers. So it really, I don't have an easy answer to that. I think, though, the one thing I'd say in terms of the spirit of what I meant in my book is once you've got your foot in the door, I think it's really important to signal to your boss that you're open to learning and doing more. And I remember when my very, very first job, very, very, very long time ago, I got in. I had a boss who always came in very early, and I got in early one day, and I kind of strolled into his office, popped my head around the door and said, I'm doing this thing that you asked me to do. I'm almost done, but I just wanted you to know that I've got time, and I'm willing to take on more tasks if you've got anything interesting you want me to do. And then slowly, slowly, he started to give me more things to do. And I think that signaling is very positive early on in your career, that you don't want to just do the minimum, that you want to really grow professionally and learn more things and show willing. But that's after you get your foot in the door.
Well, and on that note, I think you've certainly walked your own talk in terms of your ability to learn and keep growing and keep mastering all these marvelous institutions that you have led and will lead in the future. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. And being so comprehensive and candid in your advice. Thank you for joining us and asking such fabulous questions. Thank you to the people online as well. Minouche has a very early start. It's not, well, it's kind of like that Brexit referendum. She needs to be up at 4 in the morning, so we've promised that we will get her away on time tonight so she can face that new challenge well rested, which after all is how one deals best with the challenges that one faces. So thank you so much for joining us. You've been a fabulous guest. Thank you. Thank you.
I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. And we will ask your address because we want to say where we should send us all.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.